Last summer, I was in Ghana speaking at a conference on violence against women and children, and while there, we were taken to visit the Cape Coast Castle. Hundreds of thousands of Africans were forced through its dungeons and its door of no return onto slave ships. It had 5 dungeon chambers for males, and descending into the darkness of one of those dungeons was claustrophobic. 200 men, shackled and chained together, stayed in the dungeon for about 3 months before they were put onto ships and sent across the Atlantic. We stood in one of those male dungeons listening in the darkness to the whole horrific story when our guide said this, "Do you know what's above the dungeon?" We all shook our heads no. "The chapel," he said. Directly above, 200 shackled men, some of them dead, others of them screaming, all of them filthy, sat God worshippers. They sang, they read the scripture, they prayed, and I suppose they took up an offering for the less fortunate. The slaves could hear the service, and the worshippers could hear the slaves some of the time because they often had somebody down there trying to keep them quiet. It took my breath away. The evil, the suffering, the humiliations, the traumas were overwhelming, and the visual parable was stunning. The people in the chapel were numb to the horrific trauma beneath their feet. We have dungeons in our world today, too. Tent cities in Haiti and Ivory Coast, genocides in Rwanda and Bosnia, wars around the world, and relentless systemic violence in our own inner cities. Do you know that all of these events produce traumatized human beings? 1 in 4 soldiers today is a child. And there are 200 million children living on the streets of this world. Amnesty International says that 1 in 3 females is beaten, coerced into sex, or otherwise abused in her lifetime. You think about that statistic the next time you sit in an airport, or walk on a city street, or sit in a conference, or the pews of your church. 1 in 3. Child sexual abuse, child marriage, female genital mutilation, physically and psychologically harm countless females around the world. Girls have acid thrown in their faces because they went to school, and they are stoned to death because they managed to get themselves raped. Eastern Congo is the rape capital of the world. A recent UN Human Rights panel says that hundreds of thousands have been raped during the conflict there, and 13% of them are younger than the age of 10. Sex trafficking, which is of course the slavery of our day, a brutal and large-scale destructive force of girls and women, and it is not just over there, it is here in our streets and our cities, it is in this city. The dungeons are here, and sometimes they even sit down next to us. All of these things, from tent cities to abuse, things you and I find difficult to comprehend or hold for very long in our minds, are endured by human beings one at a time. They result in traumatized human beings. That means that they live with recurrent, tormenting memories of atrocities witnessed or borne, memories that infect their sleep with horrific nightmares, destroy their relationships, their capacity to work or to study, torment their emotions, shatter their faith, and mutilate their hope. Trauma is extraordinary, you see, not because it rarely happens, but because it completely swallows and destroys normal human ways of coping and living. The dungeons of this world are filled with traumatized people. And as it was in Cape Coast Castle, the usual response to atrocity is to try and remove it from the mind. Those who've been traumatized want to flee the memory of its occurrence, and we who listen find we want to flee also. We find it too terrible to remember and too incomprehensible to put into words. That is why we use the phrase unspeakable atrocities. The great tension is the futile attempt to forget the unspeakable even while it continues in the mind, sometimes screaming. That push-pull between the need to forget and the need to speak is the central dialectic of trauma. And the tension is not only experienced by individuals or families, but by institutions and, yes, even nations. It is not only experienced by the traumatized, it is experienced by those of us who bear witness to trauma. I know something of this tension because as a psychologist, I have worked now not 35, but 38 years with things like sexual abuse and rape and domestic violence and combat trauma and genocide and sex trafficking. I have looked into traumatized eyes all over this globe as I have traveled. And I've seen the push-pull in my clients who were too terrified to remember and speak, but who cannot forget. And I have witnessed families and churches and, yes, nations deny the existence of evil and trauma in their worlds. And I know the tension exists in those who bear witness because it resides in me. You know, we see an atrocity on the television or on the internet, and soon after we look for a way to remove ourselves. The stories threaten our comfort, our position, our systems. The stories are vile and messy and disruptive, and traumatized people need attention and assistance often for a very long time. The trauma stories of our own families or institutions and organizations get buried, and geographical distance and the push of a button enable us to do the same with entire nations. Just ask Rwanda. We are, in fact, quite like the chapel goers in the fort in Ghana. So what are we to do? Choose complicity by turning away in silence or flit from cause to cause, trying to do something, which is sometimes about making ourselves feel better, isn't it? Or feeding some voyeuristic need. Or render judgment and categorize the traumatized as they. You know, if they were more responsible or made better moral choices, they would not be suffering. Under the form of